Hey, welcome. This is Lee Waller. I'm working through tutorials on this little scene here that I've created. In this tutorial, I'm going to take a look at this Vaporation field right here that's engulfing the bird and then zapping it up into the UFO. In other tutorials, I have covered the beam, the creation of the UFO, and separating the foreground tree element here from the background. The first thing we're going to do is auto trace the bird. What that will do is create a mask around the bird frame by frame. We're going to need that information for creating part of this effect. I'm going to copy this footage here, Control C, and then I'm going to start a new composition. Just going to label this bird trace, 1920 by 1080, 23976, 10 seconds on that. Hit OK. Then I'm going to paste the bird footage in there. I'm going to reset on the transform properties, the bird footage. The auto trace works better this way. And now with that footage selected, I'm just going to go up to Layer, drop down here to Auto Trace, and you'll see this dialog box here. And if Preview is selected, you'll see that first frame has been auto traced already. We're going to trace the alpha channel. Now that alpha channel has been generated by key light whenever we keyed the bird out. So with these settings, we're going to hit OK and then let After Effects trace that. So the trace is complete, and so now we can scrub through this footage and you can see that we have a live update of that mask that has been created around the bird. Now it is on its own solid right there. I'm going to copy that layer now, Control C, Command C. Now I need to start a new composition. Let's label this Evaporate Effect Transition. And that is the key on this one, is it is going to be a transition that we're going to use to transition this effect in and out. Hit OK on that. We will paste now that auto traced bird in there. I'm going to add a new solid in. Layer, New Solid. I'm going to make this a black solid. And we will label this Blob. OK. And now we're going to add an effect to this. We want to jump up, and easiest way is probably going to just jump over here to Effects and Presets and type in Mr. And there it is, Mr. Mercury. We'll grab that effect and drop it onto our blob layer and scrub through that. And let me turn off our transparency here so we can see this. There's Mr. Mercury. And we're going to use that to help create this effect and then also transition it in and out. Now I want to start this effect at 7 seconds in the composition. That's the reason I'm doing these all at 10 seconds so that they'll time out together. And I'm going to hit my left bracket, and that brings the beginning of this composition right here to the 7-second mark. And we have a few changes we're going to make to the effect. We are going to animate radius X and Y. First, I'm going to set them radius X to 3 and then radius Y to 6. And I'm going to page down a couple of times to get my timeline indicator to 703 right there. And then I'm going to set keyframes for radius X and Y. Now I'm going to continue to make a few more adjustments. I want this producer, the point from where the blob is coming out. I want that producer to be right over here. So I'm going to grab the producer crosshairs right there, and you'll see that that becomes active in the composition, and drop it about right there. Maybe move it up just a little bit. And then we'll continue to take a look at the rest of the properties. Velocity, we'll leave at 1. Birth rate, we're going to increase to 23.5. Longevity, let's set that at 6. Gravity, we're going to drop that down a little bit to 0.8. Resistance, we're going to bring that up to 0.31. On the extra, let's bring that up to 1.4. And then on animation, let's change that from explosive to direction. And on the influence map, let's change from blob in and out to constant blobs. Birth size, we're going to drop down just a little bit to 0.1. And then our depth size, we'll drop it down to 0.65. And then we'll scrub through that and take a look at it. I'm going to select the layer, hit the U key so I can see these two keyframes that I've created. And I'm going to jump in now to just 12 frames more, to 7 seconds and 15 frames. And we're going to increase that radius X and Y now up to 52 on X and 41 on Y. And so we get this spreading, and we get a little bit more texture out of the smaller pieces of the blob. You'll see how that covers, and what we're trying to do is cover the bird fairly quickly. And now what we will do to contain this effect within the bird is we're going to drop down here to the auto trace version of the bird, and we will alpha matte the blob. So now you can see, let me turn my transparency grid back off. Now you'll see how the bird is filled up by the blob effect. We don't see it anywhere else, just inside of the bird. Before I jump out of this, I do want to change the color of this solid for the auto trace bird. I'm going to select that layer, do Control-Shift-Y or Command-Shift-Y, and change that to black. Hit OK on that. And we'll just click that off one more time and take a look at it. So there's our transition. We're going to use that to transition the effect in, and then also use that to transition the bird out. I need two versions of this transition effect. The second one, to create it, I'm going to jump back into my project tab here, and you'll see that composition right there. I'm going to duplicate it, Control-D, and then I'm going to open that up. And one adjustment that I need to make, I need a wider boundary on the bird, so when I have a glow effect, I can also transition that in. So to do that, I'm going to jump into the mask properties for this. And I'm mainly concerned about this first mask here, which is the outline of the bird. And I'm going to bring that mask expansion up to 38. And now when we scrub through the effect, you'll see that there's a larger boundary for that. So at this point, we've created our evaporate effect transition, duplicated and created a second version of it. Now we're going to create our evaporator field, the actual green field that engulfs the bird. We'll start with a new composition. We'll label it Evaporator Field and hit OK on that. The first layer we need is our green solid. So I'm going to jump in here, grab that green solid and drop it in. I'll need another solid, so we can probably just grab one of these. Yeah, that one will work. And drop that on top. And going to use, again, fractal noise on this. So go up to Effect, Noise and Grain, Fractal Noise, drop that on there. Going to make some changes to this. On the fractal type, we'll change that from basic to strings, and spline on the noise type. Contrast, set that at 60. And sub influence. So we're going to jump down here into the sub settings, sub influence at 99, and sub scaling up to 100. And we're going to animate this on the evolution here. So set a keyframe right there at the beginning and bring it to the end. We're going to do 5 full evolutions on that. And there is part of our effect. Now let's add in one more effect and go to Channel, Set Matte. We're going to keep it on layer 1, and then we're going to change that to Masks. And we will change Use for Matte from Alpha Channel to Lightness. And you can see the green solid begin to blend in. We'll jump down to the green solid and change that Track Matte from No Track Matte to Alpha Matte. And that evaporator field is ready to go. So we're getting there. We've got one more composition that we're going to create, and this should bring everything together on this tutorial. We want to label this one Evaporation Effect. So up to this point, everything we've built will be compiled in this composition. So I need a version of that auto traced bird. So I'm going to jump into the bird trace composition, copy that, Control C, Command C, come back to our evaporation effect composition and paste that in. We'll need to change the color from white to green. So we're going to select that, Command Shift Y or Control Shift Y, and select that, and we'll dial in our hexadecimal of 4DFF55. That's the green color we've been using on this. Hit New. We'll need to make a few changes to this one. So we're going to jump into the mask settings. We don't need mask 2 and 3, so we'll delete those. Jump into mask 1 right there. And let's feather this mask to 20 pixels. And then we're going to expand it by 10 pixels. This is going to be kind of a glow on this effect. Keep in mind that this is our transition, and this transition actually starts down here at 7 seconds. So when we scrub through that, you see right now it is covering up the bird. So what we want to do is we want to reveal the bird with this transition. So on this bottom layer here, let's go to Track Matte and change that to Alpha Matte. So rather than hiding the bird, it is revealing the bird or the effect that we're going to create. The next layer that we want, we're going to drop in a version of the bird that is keyed out. So we'll need to go grab that from the original composition. There is our keyed bird. I'm going to copy that, Control C, Command C, go back to our evaporation effect, make sure that my timeline indicator is at the beginning of the timeline, paste that in. We'll bring that up to the top and then jump into that and reset the transform properties on that so that it lines up with the other layers, and you can see the transition of the glow behind it. And now we're going to grab the evaporation effect, the original one that we created, and drop that on top of the bird. What we want to accomplish is transitioning the bird, the original version of the bird, out. So we're going to select Alpha Inverted Matte. And so you'll see that throughout this composition, we'll have a version of the bird, but then in this transition, the bird is removed. Now we want to create the atomized version of the bird. So let's duplicate layer 2, making a copy of the keyed bird. We're going to add an effect to this. So let's go up to Effect, come down to Simulation, and go to CC Ball Action. We'll make a few adjustments to this. On the scatter, let's set that to 2. And on the grid spacing, let's set that to 1. And on the ball size, let's bring that up to 150. And what we want to do is we want to make these move. So the instability state there, we're going to animate that. You can see if I scrub through that, they're moving around. So at 7 seconds, we'll set a keyframe for the instability state right there. Take a look at that, hit the U key, and then we want to drag out to the end of the composition, and we'll do 5 cycles on that. I want to keep this effect. You can kind of see how it is moving outside of the boundary of the bird. So I want to keep that constrained. So we'll use another version of this evaporate effect transition to constrain that with. Because of duplicating this layer here, it still has alpha inverted matte set to it. So we'll change that to alpha matte. And then we're going to need to hide the visibility of that effect. So now we have the bird being atomized. So now we need to add in the Evaporator Field effect. Up in the project panel, we have created that Evaporator Field effect. We can grab that, drop that in, so that we can kind of get more of the look on top of the bird. I'm going to scale this effect down to about 50% and then adjust this so that it's right over the bird. And now we will use the transition effect again. I'm going to duplicate that, bring that up top, and then we'll track matte, use the track matte option for that effect. So now we have the entire effect created through these multiple layers and using the transition to wipe all of them on. We can now take this back into the main composition and set up the transition to this. I'm going to go back into the main composition, and we will grab the evaporation effect composition and drop it in. It should time out pretty much to where we need it to, but we do need to make some adjustments to get it into the right position. To kind of know where that right position is, I'm going to take a look at the original footage of the bird that's been keyed. I'm going to drop into the transform controls there, and you'll see the scale is 40%, so we can set that quickly. So go to scale on the evaporation effect, bring that down to 40%. Now to position the bird with the evaporation effect, we'll need to figure this out. The effect needs to hit at about 7:03 in the timeline. And we want at that point for the bird to be attached to the beam and stay with the beam. So the first thing that I will do is at that point, we will no longer need the original bird. So I'm going to trim that layer right there at 7:03 in the timeline. I'm going to hit Alt and then right bracket. We'll do the same with the evaporation effect, but we'll trim the front of it. We'll hit Alt left bracket. To find the position of where I want this evaporation effect layer to be, I'm going to come down here to the bird that's been keyed, and you'll see that this position information is coming from the tree position track. So to find the position that I actually need this to be at, I'm going to disable that link for just a moment, and now I can adjust this evaporation effect position to this coordinate right here, and so 796.5 by 536.1, and so those two are in the exact same position. I will enable that tree track again on the bird that has been keyed. And now I want the evaporation effect to follow the saucer. So I'll just grab that parent link pick whip right there from the evaporation effect and drag it down to the saucer position track. So to kind of review, at this point right here, what happens is we no longer are using the original bird. We are transitioning to the evaporation effect that we've placed on the bird, and we've transitioned its position from the tree track that we did to the saucer track that we did. So what happens is the beam comes down, it hits the bird, and then at that point the bird is under control of the beam and the effect that is atomizing it. Now we want to take a look at creating the atomized bird. You can see particles going up into the beam, into the saucer. So we're going to create those. I'm going to start another composition, new composition, and we'll call this bird atoms. And okay on that. We'll need one layer in here, a new solid. And again, we'll label this bird atoms. Hit okay on that. And we're going to use CC particle world. So go up to effect and drop down to simulation, CC particle world. And you'll see there, it generates particles. We're going to make a few changes to the effect. We'll come back in a minute and animate the birth rate. For right now, we'll set it at 3. And then let's take a look at the longevity. We'll leave that at 1. Then we're going to jump into the producer, make a few changes here. So on the radius X, Y, and Z, we're going to make some changes. We're just going to bring that down to 0.02. And then on Y and Z, 0.015, 0.015. We'll jump into the physics here. We'll go to the animation type and change that from explosive to cone axis. And then on velocity, that's going to zero out. Then we'll jump down to gravity, and we're going to set that at a negative 0.16. And then we'll jump into the particle type and change the look of this. We're going to go from line to darken and faded sphere. And we're going to adjust the size a little bit. So we'll drop these down to 0.15 on both the birth and death size. And we're going to change those colors. On the birth color, I have a hexadecimal of 331804. And then on the death color, we'll change that to 4D2803. Now we'll go back to the birth rate, and we're going to animate that birth rate, because you'll see here that's just going to be a continuous flow of particles, and we want that to cut off. Let's jump into 11 frames, and we'll set our first keyframe on the birth rate right there. And with that selected, we can hit the U key to see that keyframe. Then we'll jump to 14 frames to set our birth rate down to 0. It to generate some particles and then to stop. So now back in our main comp, we're going to add those bird atoms into the beam here. So we'll go to our project panel here, go to bird atoms, bring that composition in. So we want this to start at about 7 seconds and 6 frames in the timeline. So I'm going to set the timeline indicator right there. I'm going to select that layer, and I'm going to use the left bracket key to line the beginning of that composition up right there at the 706 mark. And then we'll scrub in, and you can see the particles being generated right there. That's not where we want them, so we need to make a few adjustments to it. First, we're going to adjust the scale, and I'm going to deconstrain those two proportions right there, and I'm going to drop our X value down to 40 and our Y value down to 54. And then I'm just going to grab the particles and bring them down right about there. And then in our timeline, I'm going to grab that composition, that layer, and I'm going to bring it down beneath the beam so that they do come up behind the beam rather than on top of everything. So let's play through and see what happens. All right, that looks like what we want. Particles coming up. So the next thing now, we need to animate out the evaporation effect and then also the beam. We already have what we need to create the bird disappearing, and that is going to be found in our evaporate effect transition. So I'm going to jump right there, and so this blob layer right here is what I want to use. I'm going to copy that, Control C, and then jump back into my main composition and paste that in. We're going to need to make a few changes to it. I'm going to bring it all the way to the beginning of the composition. And I'll also need to make the layer visible. We can scrub through and take a look. There is the effect. I want to time reverse the layer, but the effect won't follow that time reverse. So what I need to do is I need to pre-compose this. So I'm going to right click on it and go to pre-compose and make sure that we move all attributes into the new composition, and we'll hit OK on that. And now when I time reverse this, the effect will follow. So I'm going to right click on it, go to time and time reverse layer. And then when we drag down here to the end, you'll see that it is in reverse. And that's how we're going to animate out the bird. And we just need to get the timing set on this. So I kind of want the bird out by about 8:15 in the composition. So set my timeline indicator right there and then just drag that to that point. So now with that in place, as far as timing goes, I'm going to scrub through and show you. You can see now that that blob effect is covering up the entire scene. So we need to make some adjustments to that. First thing I'm going to do is scale it down a little bit. I'm going to bring that down to about 65%. And then I'm going to adjust it for position to be over the bird. And let's go down here so I can see a little more of this. And I want it to be that point about right there. All right, that looks good. And now so that this isn't covering up our scene, we're going to jump to the evaporation effect, which is the bird down here at the end. And then we're going to use this blob effect as a track matte. So go into the track matte for the evaporation effect and choose alpha matte, that blob comp 1. And so what will happen is it's covered But then as that effect disappears, you'll see that it pulls the bird out. So we have the evaporation effect hit, and then this blob effect on top pulls the whole thing out right there. We now need to animate the beam out, and we'll pretty much be done. So now I'm going to jump to the beam, and we already have animated it in using a linear wipe. So I'm just going to select that layer, hit the U key, brings up my linear wipe transition, and we're just going to reverse this. So I'm going to jump to 8:15 in the timeline, and I'm going to set a keyframe right there for that linear transition completion. And then I'm just going to page up, shift page up once. And that jumps me 10 frames forward, and I'll set a keyframe there. Now I do need to jump back to my last keyframe and set that property. I'm going to bring it back to 100%. And I want to ease this transition in right here. So I'm going to right click on that, go to Keyframe Assistant and Easy Ease Out. Need to adjust because our bird is not disappearing quick enough. So we'll need to make an adjustment on that. And we can do that by sliding this blob comp. Let's see how that goes now. Maybe one or two more frames there. And this just all goes to timing. So I'm going to adjust this just a little bit and see how our timing works out on it. All right, looks pretty good. I hope this series of tutorials has been helpful. For more on After Effects, motion media design, and editing in Premiere, take a look at my other tutorials.